I didn't know my husband's second family was living in our guest house until the day I went there to evict the tenants. I still remember the smell of rain on concrete that morning, the kind that hangs heavy in the air, mixing with the faint scent of the jasmine vine crawling along our front gate. The world felt still, calm, unaware of the storm I was walking into. The eviction notice was folded neatly in my hand, its edges damp from the drizzle. I wasn't angry, just tired. The tenants in our guest house hadn't paid rent for 3 months, and despite several polite reminders, they'd gone silent. My husband, Daniel, had assured me he'd handle it, but as usual, weeks turned into months. And that Thursday morning, I decided to handle it myself. I didn't even tell him I was going. Our guest house sat behind the main house, a modest 2-bedroom space with cream walls and a cherrywood porch, built years ago when we thought family might come visit more often. But no one really did. It had become, at least in my mind, an empty shell, occasionally rented to traveling nurses or students. When I turned the key in the lock, I expected dust, cobwebs, maybe an echo. What I didn't expect was a home. The first thing that hit me was warmth, literal warmth. The place was lived in. There was a faint smell of cooked rice and something sweet, maybe vanilla candles. A pair of tiny pink shoes lay by the doormat. There were curtains, not the old beige ones we'd left hanging, but soft floral ones that fluttered with the breeze. On the counter sat 2 mugs, still half full, beside a bowl of cereal that hadn't been rinsed. A child's drawing, a stick figure family, was pinned to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a heart. I stood there, my heart thudding in my chest, a growing chill creeping up my arms. Someone had been living here, as if it were their home, and not just anyone, a family. A soft humming sound came from the back room, a woman's voice, low and tender, singing to a child. I froze. My throat tightened as I followed the sound. The door was half open. Through the crack, I saw her, a woman with dark curls and tired eyes, sitting on the bed, holding a little girl in her lap, maybe 4 or 5 years old. The girl was brushing a doll's hair and giggling softly. The woman looked up suddenly, and our eyes met. There was no fear in hers, just recognition. And that's when I noticed it. A framed photo on the nightstand. Daniel, smiling, holding that same little girl. I don't remember how long I stood there before I finally spoke, but when I did, my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Who are you?" I asked quietly. The woman's face paled. She pulled the child closer. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. He said you never come here." Back then, I thought I knew what betrayal felt like. I thought it was anger, screaming, broken glass. But standing there, with my husband's photo staring back at me from another woman's nightstand, I realized betrayal is quiet. It's the sound of your heartbeat when the world goes still. It's the way your hands tremble, not from rage, but from disbelief. That night, I didn't confront Daniel. Not yet. I went through the motions like a ghost, cooked dinner, set the table, and smiled when he walked through the door, his tie loosened, his face weary from work. "Long day," he said, kissing my forehead. The scent of his cologne, sandalwood and mint, made my stomach twist. He asked if I'd spoken to the tenants about the rent. I said no. He smiled faintly. "I'll take care of it this weekend." I nodded, and for the first time in 15 years, I lied to him with a steady gaze, because I needed to see what he'd do next. Daniel and I had built what most people would call a good life. A 2-story home with a garden, a guest house, and a reputation for being that dependable couple, the ones who hosted barbecues in summer and sent out Christmas cards in winter. We met in college, both studying accounting, both poor but determined. I fell for his quiet confidence, the way he made me feel safe, grounded. We married young. No children, not by choice, but by circumstance. Years of trying had left us with more scars than hope, and eventually, we stopped trying. We poured our love into our home instead, or so I thought. Daniel was reliable, to a fault. He never missed a payment, never forgot anniversaries, never raised his voice. He was the kind of man everyone trusted, maybe even admired, which made what I discovered feel even more surreal, like finding a hidden door in a house you'd built with your own hands. That night, I watched him eat the dinner I'd made, rosemary chicken and mashed potatoes, while I replayed the woman S words in my head. He said, "You never come here." That meant she knew who I was. That meant she knew about me. And yet, I didn't know she existed. I spent the next few days observing, quietly, carefully. Daniel's schedule, his phone habits, the way he lingered outside after dinner, pretending to check emails. I noticed how often he mentioned the property now, always with vague excuses. "I have to check on the guest house," or "the tenants had a plumbing issue again." Each time, my heart tightened a little more. I stopped sleeping through the night. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. and stare at the ceiling, hearing echoes of that child's laughter. Did he tuck her in at night the way I used to imagine he would, if we'd had one of our own? I began keeping a small journal, not to write my feelings, but to document facts, dates, times, things said. I wasn't sure why, but part of me knew. Once the truth came out, I'd need to remember how it all unfolded. One evening, I asked him casually, "What's happening with the guest house tenants? Have they paid?" He didn't flinch. "I spoke to them yesterday. They'll settle up by next week." I nodded, stirring my tea. "You sure?" "Of course. Don't worry about it." But I saw something flicker across his face, a shadow of guilt, maybe fear. It was gone as quickly as it came. That's when I knew for certain. He wasn't renting that guest house. He was living a second life inside it. That weekend, I made a decision. If he wouldn't tell me the truth, I'd find it myself. And when I did, it would destroy everything I thought I knew about love, marriage, and the man I'd built my world around. For a long time, life went on quietly. Or maybe I should say, I let it. I worked from home most days, designing marketing campaigns for small businesses. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me time with my daughter, Emily, who was 8 then, and with the house, the one I loved so dearly. Ethan often said I was lucky to be my own boss, but sometimes his tone carried a faint edge, as if freedom was something he'd deemed misplaced long ago. He left early, came home late, and always seemed to have a meeting he couldn't talk about. I told myself that's what hard-working men do. They build futures. But that spring, small things began to whisper otherwise. It started with the electricity bill. I remember opening it on a Tuesday afternoon, a bill almost double our usual amount. I frowned, running my finger along the numbers, wondering if the rates had changed. I even called the company. The woman on the line confirmed the reading was correct. "Maybe a power surge?" she offered kindly. "Do you have any outdoor property connected to your main meter?" Outdoor property. The guest house. I hung up, brushed it off. The guest house hadn't been used in over a year, not since my cousin stayed briefly after her divorce. Ethan always said it was good to have for emergencies. That night, I brought it up casually over dinner. "Hey, the power bill doubled this month. Do you think the meter's faulty?" He didn't look up from his phone. Probably. Those companies always mess things up. "I called them," I said. "They said maybe it's because something outside's using electricity." He finally looked at me, smiling faintly. "The guest house, maybe. There's probably a leak or something." I nodded, but something about how quickly he had that answer made me pause. That weekend, while Ethan was away on a team-building retreat, I decided to check. The guest house sat at the far end of our yard, surrounded by overgrown shrubs. I hadn't stepped inside in months. When I reached for the door handle, I noticed the faintest smudge, like fingerprints. The key turned easily, but when I pushed the door open, a wave of warm, stale air met me. And then, the smell. It wasn't unpleasant, just lived in. A faint scent of detergent, maybe cooking oil. My heart beat faster. The curtains, new ones, pale blue with lace trim, swayed gently from a half-open window. The couch had cushions I didn't recognize. And on the table, there was a half-empty mug of coffee, still warm. I froze. Every hair on my arms rose. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I took a few steps in. There were groceries on the counter, a folded blanket on the couch, a pair of children's shoes by the door, small, pink, with glittery stars. My breath caught in my throat. I backed out slowly, locking the door behind me. My hands shook so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. I didn't tell Ethan that night. I wanted to. I sat across from him as he laughed at something on TV, his face soft in the blue glow. And I thought, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone from his office needed a temporary place. But deep down, I already knew something had cracked. The next day, I went back during daylight. Everything was gone. The mug, the shoes, even the curtains had been replaced. The old beige ones were back, perfectly ironed. If I hadn't taken a photo on my phone the day before, I would have thought I imagined it. That night, I showed him the photo. "What's this?" I asked. Ethan glanced at it, expression unreadable. "Oh, that. I let one of the guys from work use it for a couple nights. His house flooded. You were busy, so I didn't want to bother you." I stared at him. "You didn't tell me because I was busy?" He sighed, setting his fork down. "Claire, it's not a big deal. Why are you making it one?" I swallowed hard. "Because there were children's shoes in there." He blinked once. "He has a daughter." There was no hesitation in his voice, no flicker of guilt. He even smiled faintly. "You're overthinking again. You always do this." The gaslight burned hotter than any anger I could muster, so I let it go. Outwardly, at least. But inside, something cold and sharp began to take root. In the weeks that followed, Ethan grew distant in new ways. He'd take his calls outside, keep his phone face down. He started showering immediately after getting home, something he'd never done before. And every now and then, I'd see the faintest glimmer of something out the kitchen window at night, a light in the guest house. Sometimes a shadow would move past the curtains. I started waking up at odd hours, heart pounding, unsure if it was a dream or instinct. One night, around 2 a.m., I saw a car parked near the side gate, a small silver sedan. It was gone by morning. By then, I'd stopped questioning whether something was wrong. I just didn't yet know what. And maybe that's what made it worse. The waiting, the quiet unraveling of the life I thought I understood. Because the truth doesn't always crash through your front door. Sometimes it waits patiently in the dark, right at the edge of your backyard. It was a Sunday afternoon in late September when everything finally broke. Ethan was out running errands. Emily was at a friend's birthday party. The house was quiet, that kind of eerie quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. I'd been sitting on the couch, trying to work, but my eyes kept drifting toward the window, toward the guest house at the far end of the yard. And then I saw it. Movement. A figure, small and quick, darting past the curtain. My heart hammered. I stood, pressing a hand against the window pane. There was no mistaking it this time. Someone was in there. Without thinking, I grabbed my keys, slipped on my shoes, and walked across the yard. The air was sharp, the kind that tastes like rain before it falls. As I got closer, I heard it. Laughter. A woman's laugh, and a child's voice, light and happy. My hand trembled as I knocked. Once, twice. The laughter stopped. I waited, pulse racing. Then the door opened just a crack, and I found myself staring into the face of a woman I had never seen before. She was younger than me, maybe by 10 years. Dark hair, soft features, wearing one of Ethan's old sweatshirts, the one with the faded college logo. Behind her, a little girl peeked out shyly, maybe 5 years old. She had Ethan's eyes, that same hazel green that caught the light like glass. My world tilted. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, voice cautious. I tried to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. I forced out, "I think," There's been some mistake. This is my property." The woman blinked, confused. "Ethan told me you were his landlord." Her voice trembled just slightly, and in that instant I knew. Landlord. The word hit me like a slap. "I'm his wife," I said quietly. Silence. Her face drained of color. Behind her, the little girl tugged at her sleeve, whispering, "Mommy?" I stepped back, dizzy. The air felt thick, unreal. "Wait," she stammered. He told me you left him years ago, that you moved abroad." My breath came in shallow bursts. "He told you that?" Tears welled in her eyes. "Oh God, I didn't know." I wanted to scream, to ask 100 questions, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, the truth unfurling in front of me like a slow, cruel film. Ethan had built another life right behind mine, a woman, a child, a home. And I had funded it all. The electricity, the groceries, the quiet, comfortable life I thought I was building for us, was being split in two. The woman, her name was Sophia, I would later learn, stepped aside, tears streaking down her face. "Please," she whispered, "come in." I did. It was like stepping into a mirror world. Everything familiar, yet wrong. The same style of couch we had in our living room. A framed photo of Ethan holding the little girl, smiling in that same crooked way that used to make me melt. There was love here. Real love. And that broke me more than the betrayal itself. Because this wasn't a fling. It wasn't a mistake. It was a life he had chosen. One I had never been invited into. I sat down slowly, the sound of my heartbeat roaring in my ears. "How long?" I asked. Sophia hesitated. "We've been together about 6 years. Emily was 8. He had started this when I was pregnant." The world blurred. I clutched the edge of the table just to keep from falling. "He said he couldn't marry me because of finances," she whispered. "He said he was still tied up with legal things from his first marriage." Legal things? I almost laughed, that hollow, bitter kind of laugh that doesn't sound human. Sophia was crying now. "I swear I didn't know. I thought he was honest. He'd come and go, said he worked late. Sometimes he'd say he was staying at a hotel near the office. I believed him. I believed him too. That was the part that burned deepest. We had both been living off his lies, thinking we were the only ones who mattered. I stood, shaky but steady enough to whisper, "Pack your things." Her head jerked up. "You and your daughter. You need to leave before he gets back." "But where will we—" "I don't care," I said, my voice breaking. "You shouldn't be here when I talk to him." She nodded, sobbing quietly, and began gathering things, clothes, toys, pictures. As I left the guest house, the air was cold and heavy, thick with the smell of rain and betrayal. I walked back to the main house, sat on the couch, and waited. At 7:12 p.m., Ethan's car pulled into the driveway. He came in whistling, that same tune he always did when he wanted to seem casual. When he saw me sitting there, phone on the coffee table, his smile faltered. "Hey," he said carefully, "you okay?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him, really looked at him, for what felt like the first time in years. "How long?" I asked softly. "Have they been living in my guest house?" The color drained from his face. He didn't ask who. He didn't pretend confusion. That told me everything. "Claire." "6 years," I interrupted. She said 6 years. He dropped his keys, running a hand through his hair. "It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think." My voice cracked, anger spilling through the calm. "You built a second family, with my money, in my backyard." He tried to step closer, but I moved back. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't you dare come near me." His voice rose then, defensive, almost desperate. "You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She needed help, and then things just happened. I couldn't leave her. And you couldn't leave me?" He fell silent. That silence said more than any lie ever could. I picked up my phone, my hands trembling but steady enough to hit record. "Say it," I whispered. "Say you did it. Say you had a second family." He looked at me, the mask finally slipping. "Fine," he spat. "Yes, I did. But I never meant to hurt you." I stopped recording. "You already did." And with that, I walked past him, past the man I had built my world around, and into the night air that suddenly felt clearer than it had in years. Behind me, the guest house lights flickered off. For the first time, the yard was dark, empty, honest. The night after the truth came out, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, staring at the flickering light above the stove, that same bulb I'd been meaning to replace for months. Funny how life reminds you of the little things you neglected while trusting the wrong person. Ethan spent the night in his car. I could see the silhouette of his figure through the window every time I got up to pour another cup of coffee. But he didn't come inside, not once. By dawn, my decision was made. I wasn't going to scream, or throw things, or beg for explanations. I was going to do what he never expected me to do, take control. The first call I made was to a lawyer. Her name was Rachel Tran, a calm-voiced woman recommended by a friend from church. I told her everything, my voice shaking only once when I said the words, "second family." Rachel didn't gasp. She didn't pity me. She just said, "We'll make this right." That was all I needed to hear. She guided me through every step, the financial tracing, the property documents, the proof of where my money had gone. It turned out every renovation expense, every extra insurance payment had led to that guest house, to Sophia and her child. Every lie had a receipt. When Ethan finally came inside that evening, he looked exhausted, unshaven, older somehow. He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. "I've spoken to a lawyer." He froze. "Claire, please." "I'm not interested in hearing more excuses," I said softly. "You lied to me for 6 years. You used my income to fund another home. And you let me walk past that house every day thinking it was empty." He rubbed his face, sighing. "I didn't plan it this way. I thought I could handle it." "Handle it?" I repeated. "You make it sound like a business deal. You didn't just handle 2 households, Ethan. You lied to 2 women. You fathered 2 children and pretended you were whole." He looked at me then, eyes glossy with guilt. I didn't want to lose Emily. That name, our daughters, was the one thing that still had power over me. My throat tightened. "You already did," I whispered. "She just doesn't know it yet." For the next week, we lived like strangers in the same house. We barely spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken truths and the echoes of what used to be laughter. Emily sensed something. Kids always do. "Mom," she asked one evening as I tucked her in, "why isn't Daddy eating dinner with us anymore?" I forced a smile. "He's working on some things, sweetheart." "Are you mad at him?" I hesitated. Then I said gently, "Sometimes grown-ups hurt each other, even when they don't mean to. But you don't ever have to pick sides, okay?" She nodded, half asleep already. When she turned over, I sat there for a long time, brushing her hair away from her face. She had my nose, but his eyes. Those same eyes that now felt like strangers. A few days later, I drove to the guest house one last time. It was empty now. The curtains were gone, the furniture stripped bare. A faint scent of lavender still lingered. Sophia's perfume. On the counter, I found a note. "Claire, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. He told me stories that made sense at the time. I wish you peace, truly. I'll be gone by morning. Sophia." I folded it carefully and slipped it into my pocket. Then I locked the door, this time with my own key. When I told Ethan I wanted a separation, he didn't fight me. Maybe he was too tired, or maybe he already knew he'd lost everything that mattered. He just sat at the table, nodding slowly. "Do I still get to see Emily?" "Of course," I said quietly. You're still her father. That part doesn't change. But as for us, that part's over." He looked down, tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. "I'm sorry, Claire." "I know," I said, "but sorry doesn't rebuild a marriage." That weekend, I packed his things into boxes. Each shirt, each photo, each keepsake, reminders of a man who existed only halfway. While I worked, I found our old wedding photo in the back of a drawer. We were standing on the beach, barefoot and smiling. The sun was setting behind us, painting everything gold. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers tracing the edges of his face. Then I placed it face down in the box. When he came to collect his things, he stood in the doorway, looking at me like he wanted to say something profound, something that would make me change my mind. But the silence between us was too wide, too broken. He left without another word. The sound of his car pulling away was both painful and freeing, like an old wound finally being cleaned. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window. The yard looked different now, emptier, but honest. The guest house sat in darkness, its windows reflecting nothing but moonlight. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I realized something then. Betrayal doesn't just destroy trust. It exposes strength you didn't know you had. I had spent years believing I needed Ethan's stability to survive. But standing there, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the rain tapping gently against the glass, I understood. I was never the fragile one. He was. He needed lies to build his world. I only needed truth to rebuild mine. The next morning, I made pancakes for Emily. She smiled when I added extra syrup, the way her father used to do. "Can we visit Grandma this weekend?" she asked. "Of course," I said, smiling. "I think she'll be happy to see us." And I meant it. For once, everything that came out of my mouth was real. That afternoon, my lawyer called. "Claire," she said, "we found something." Her tone made my stomach drop. "What is it?" "Bank transfers, large ones, not just to Sophia's account, but to someone else's, a woman named Layla." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Another one? I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "Send me everything," I said quietly, because maybe the story wasn't over yet. Maybe the man I thought I'd finally understood was still capable of more lies, deeper than I could ever imagined. When Rachel emailed me the bank statements that night, I couldn't bring myself to open them right away. I sat there at the dining table, the same one where Ethan and I had shared countless dinners, birthdays, and whispered plans for the future. The wood grain under my fingertips felt colder than usual, lifeless. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Finally, I clicked on the file. Rows of numbers, transfer after transfer, all small enough to stay unnoticed individually, but together they painted a clear picture, a pattern. Each deposit labeled as consulting, school fees, or rent assistance. And then I saw her name, Layla Marino. I didn't know her, but when I searched her name online, a photo came up. A woman in her early 30s holding a little boy who couldn't have been older than 5. His last name was the same as Ethan's. I didn't need a DNA test. My heart already knew the truth. When betrayal comes once, it shatters you. When it comes twice, it rewires you. I didn't cry this time. I just sat there, the glow of the laptop screen reflecting in my glass of untouched wine. My mind wasn't filled with pain. It was clarity, cold, focused clarity. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was theft, fraud, a web of deceit that had used my name, my income, my trust. And this time, I wasn't going to protect his image. The next day, I met Rachel again at her office. She had already done her homework. "Claire, your husband's been transferring money to multiple accounts under aliases," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "We can pursue criminal charges, financial fraud, misappropriation of joint assets, possibly bigamy, depending on the nature of his relationships." The word bigamy hung in the air like smoke. I nodded slowly. "Do it." Rachel leaned forward. "Are you sure? This will be public." I met her eyes. He made it public the moment he used my money to fund his lies. It didn't take long. By the following week, word had spread. Ethan's employer, a local real estate firm, suspended him pending investigation. Our neighbors, who used to wave warmly every morning, now whispered behind closed curtains. I didn't care about their whispers anymore. What mattered was truth. One evening, as I returned from picking up Emily from school, Mrs. Callahan from across the street approached me. She hesitated before speaking. I heard what happened, dear. I just wanted you to know you're not alone. Her kindness hit me harder than the gossip ever could. I smiled faintly, grateful but tired. Thank you, I said softly. She reached out and squeezed my hand. Men like that forget. Women rebuild stronger. Her words stayed with me. Meanwhile, Ethan was unraveling. He called constantly, sometimes apologizing, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry. I stopped answering. Until one afternoon, he showed up at the house unannounced. Emily was inside, coloring at the kitchen table. He stood on the porch, rain dripping from his jacket, his eyes red and desperate. Claire, please, you don't have to destroy me. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man I no longer recognized. His face, once familiar, was now lined with fear and guilt. I'm not destroying you, Ethan, I said quietly. You did that yourself. You're ruining my career, he snapped. My reputation. Your reputation? I interrupted. You had a wife, a mistress, and another family. You used my name to pay for them. You think I owe you silence? His jaw clenched. You'll regret this, Claire. No, I said, voice steady. The only regret I have is loving someone who didn't deserve it. He opened his mouth to speak again, but Emily's small voice interrupted us. Daddy! He froze. She was standing by the door, her drawing clutched in her hand. A stick figure family, a mom, a dad, and a little girl holding their hands. I felt my heart break all over again, Ethan's eyes filled with tears. Hey, sweetheart. But she didn't run to him. She just looked at me, confused, then back at him. Mommy, why are you outside? Her innocent question carried the weight of everything we'd lost. I knelt beside her. Because some people don't live here anymore, baby. Ethan's face crumpled. He took a step forward, but I shook my head. Go, I said firmly. He hesitated, then turned and walked down the driveway, the rain swallowing his figure until he disappeared into the gray. By the time the official charges were filed, his double life had become a public scandal. The local news ran a brief piece about it. Real estate agent faces allegations of financial misconduct. It didn't name me, but everyone in town knew. His employer terminated his contract. The other women, Sophia and Layla, both gave statements confirming their relationships with him. It was strange watching it all unfold from the outside, like observing a movie about someone I used to know. And though a part of me pitied him, a bigger part felt relief. Relief that I no longer carried the weight of his lies. One night, after putting Emily to bed, I sat outside on the porch. The guest house stood dark in the distance, windows blank and empty again. It used to symbolize deceit. Now it was just a building, 4 walls, waiting for a new purpose. I thought about renting it out again someday, maybe to a young couple starting fresh, because that's what I was doing, starting fresh. The pain hadn't vanished. It probably wouldn't, not completely, but something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was reclaiming. The version of me who once believed love meant sacrifice had learned that real love, whether for someone else or yourself, should never come at the cost of your peace. And that peace? It was slowly returning, one sunrise at a time. Still, I knew the hardest part was yet to come, explaining it all to Emily when she was old enough to understand. But I'd cross that bridge with honesty, because if there was one thing this entire nightmare had taught me, it was that truth, no matter how painful, is the only foundation worth building on. The next morning, I received a call from Rachel again. "The court accepted the charges," she said. "He'll have to face a formal hearing." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Good," I whispered. "It's time." Because justice wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure, and I was finally ready for mine. The morning of Ethan's court hearing arrived like any other day, quiet, gray, and strangely peaceful. I didn't attend. I didn't need to. Rachel had offered to have me testify, but I declined. There was nothing left I wanted to say to him. The evidence spoke for itself. The lies, the forged transfers, the second family, all neatly bound in files thicker than our marriage certificate ever was. Instead, I spent that morning making pancakes for Emily. She liked them shaped like hearts, with too much syrup. "Mommy, are we going to the park today?" she asked, her voice full of lightness that I hadn't heard in months. "Yes, sweetheart," I said, smiling softly. "The park, and then maybe ice cream if you're good." Her face lit up, and in that moment, I realized something profound. Life was moving on without needing my permission. Later that day, I received a brief text from Rachel. "He pled guilty to all charges, sentencing next month. You did it, Claire." I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt free. The kind of freedom that doesn't come from winning, but from letting go of the war entirely. That night, after Emily fell asleep, I walked out to the backyard again. The same guest house, once a place of deception, now stood empty, waiting for new life. I had repainted its door a soft shade of blue last week, a color of calm, a color of beginning again. The air smelled faintly of jasmine. Crickets hummed like a background song for peace. For the first time in years, my hands didn't shake. Over the following months, small pieces of my life began falling back into place. I took a job offer at a local design firm. The work was fulfilling, steady, and, most importantly, mine. I reconnected with old friends I had lost touch with while drowning in the illusion of a perfect marriage. And I learned to enjoy silence again. I no longer jumped when the phone rang, no longer checked Ethan's messages, no longer worried about who was on the other end of his calls. Instead, I learned to listen to myself. Every Wednesday, Emily and I would visit her therapist. Dr. Miller was gentle, patient, and had a warm smile that made my daughter feel safe. One afternoon after their session, she came running into my arms. "Mommy," she said excitedly, "Dr. Miller said we're both really brave." I smiled and hugged her tight. "We are, baby. We really are." Because bravery isn't about facing a storm, it's about stepping out of it, soaked and scarred, but still willing to walk forward. 6 months later, the final hearing came and went quietly. Ethan was sentenced to probation, community service, and full restitution for the stolen funds. It wasn't a harsh punishment, but it was accountability, and that was enough for me. He tried one last time to reach out through a letter, apologies, explanations, promises that he'd changed. I didn't read past the first line. Instead, I placed it in a box labeled past, sealed it shut, and left it in the attic. Because some doors are meant to close forever. Spring arrived again, almost exactly a year since the morning everything fell apart. The garden had grown wilder, but fuller. The roses bloomed without needing to be trimmed, as if they too had decided to live on their own terms. Emily and I hosted a small barbecue one Sunday. Just a few close friends, some laughter, a bit of music. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky gold and pink, I caught myself smiling, genuinely, deeply, for the first time in a long while. That's when Rachel stopped by. She handed me an envelope. "A little housewarming gift," she said. Inside was a single keychain engraved with the words, "Home is where truth lives." I looked at her, eyes stinging. "Thank you." She smiled. "You earned it." After everyone left, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the guest house lights glow softly in the distance. Someone new was moving in next week, a young couple expecting their first child. Life had come full circle. The house that once hid lies would now hold new beginnings. And me? I was finally ready to start mine, too. That night, I wrote a letter, not to Ethan, but to myself. Dear Claire, you survived. You loved deeply, lost painfully, and learned courageously. You walked through betrayal and came out whole, not because the pain disappeared, but because you refused to let it define you. You're not broken, you're rebuilt. Love again someday, not because you need to, but because you now know your worth. And never forget, peace isn't found in perfection, it's found in truth. Claire. I folded the letter and tucked it into my journal. For the first time, the silence around me didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. Epilogue. 1 year later. The guest house door opened and laughter spilled into the garden. The couple living there, Amira and Daniel, were holding their newborn daughter, her tiny giggles bright against the sunset. Emily was helping Amira hang wind chimes near the window. The gentle sound of metal against wind carried across the yard, soft and soothing. I smiled from the porch, sipping coffee. It wasn't the life I once dreamed of. It was better, because it was mine. And sometimes, the most beautiful stories aren't the ones that go as planned. They're the ones we write after everything falls apart, and we learn to rebuild, piece by honest piece.